Hey, just while we're on the subject of the Pokemon I picked in Mystery Dungeon, does anybody want to finish that game? It's a great game. I think I just got distracted by another game. Anyway, up to y'all. Bulbasaur PL 11. As a grass and poison type Pokemon, it has a weakness to fire, ice, psychic, and flying types, taking double damage from each. For those of you unfamiliar with Pokemon, flying types can include kinetic attacks or attacks from birds. If you want to be particular and branch out from there, beaks, wings, and talons could be considered flying type attacks by Pokemon standards. Here we have the stats of a nondescript Bulbasaur. You must remember we're talking about a species, somewhere between being an animal and a person. So for presence, awareness, and intelligence, they were left at 0. As to the stats, I looked at Bulbasaur's base stats and knocked the last digit off before placing that number in an appropriate space. Normally for Pokemon, I have Dexterity at 0 too, but I had a few points left over before hitting that multiple of 15, and since Bulbasaur is working with vines instead of hands, I thought I'd extend some mercy and give him a fighting chance at picking food from the treetops. All Pokemon are assumed to come with 4 moves and an ability, and Bulbasaur may have one of 2 abilities. I chose Chlorophyll, which boosts speed when met with sunlight. This could have been done with Favorite Environment, but it's supposed to double speed, not just provide a 1 or 2 rank bonus. As to moves, we are a wild Bulbasaur, so no moves by breeding or TM. Vine Whip is a handy way to apply a strength attack at mid-range. Leech Seed is one of my favorite moves in Pokemon altogether. The continuous modifier probably wasn't made with this in mind, but every second the target get damage, you get health. Sleep Powder, fight like a Darkrai, I always say, and Poison Powder. Pokemon's idea of poison and Mutants' Masterminds' idea of poison are 2 different things. This is just another way to apply continuous damage. Earlier we talked about type weaknesses, but most of the time that balances with type resistances too. Immunity to Fighting, Grass, Water, Electric, and Fairy have effect. Fighting types, I've come to believe, can be defined as a character that is either using martial arts, using Ki, Chi, Nin, Aura, whatever you want to call life force energy, or just a character with a fighting stat higher than 10. As to Fairy, it is the GM's discretion if that constitutes magic entirely, or just fairy spells in melee. As to Poison, it should be noted that a Poison-type Pokemon can still take the blunt force of a Poison-type attack, but they just don't get poisoned, save for an unusual circumstance introduced in recent generations. Skills. Again, wild animal. It has a general understanding of how to survive in the wilderness, where to find berries, what sorts of weather to predict, and it knows how to fight. Its 2 advantages are another gift from me, so that it may make optimal use of Vine Whip. Now, Pokemon, after getting enough combat experience, undergo a metamorphosis called Evolution, which in this case leads to becoming an Ivysaur. PL 11. Yeah, I had to triple check that one, but all my numbers are lining up, so I'm rolling with it. The same process was used to get these stats, with the exception of Fortitude. I had an extra point when putting it together. It should also be noted that I had enough extra points to grant Ivysaur normal strength on its shrinking. It took me longer than I'd like to admit to realize why this is. I chose simpler moves for it. I took off those iffy uses of continuous modifiers to give you Synthesis as your sustain option instead, and Seed Bomb, which is straightforward range damage. As to everything else we discussed on Bulbasaur, nothing else has changed, which brings me to Venusaur, PL 14. We're bringing real power to the table now. Abilities is going to be a little complicated. It can swap out abilities now. Thick Fat is the result of something called Mega Evolution and is therefore built into that bundle, so we'll check out that cost when we get there. What's important is that it can have Thick Fat or Chlorophyll, but not both. Therefore, we can make one of them an alternate effect. Thick Fat itself grants resistance to fire and ice types, essentially eliminating 2 of your 5 complications. Vine Whip is replaced with Power Whip, so let's add 2 to that strength-based damage for a total of 10, the equivalent of the sample rocket launcher in the equipment section. Petal Blizzard is for when you're sick of everyone in the room, and your ultimate move, Solar Beam. This does take a turn to charge up, though. Your stuff for typing is going to be the same Mega Evolution. Your Venusaur grants you a higher form. It can be stolen from you, but only another Venusaur can actually use it, so low chance of it being used against you. If I were to GM, I'd set a few rules on super forms, like once per scene or one per player. Skills change ever so slightly. I decided to reflect the boost in experience since we were a mere Bulbasaur, but that's about it. I had been switching out moves to give as wide a variety as possible, but really, it is possible to keep Poison Powder from when you were a Bulbasaur. I'd advise letting the player make all 3 character sheets in advance, and then the GM rewards the player by letting them exchange when it's time. As for when you'd want a Bulbasaur, I'd recommend a Pokemon Mystery Dungeon themed campaign, or you can humanize it to create unusual antagonists who'd get along nicely with the Green Man if you're familiar with the Green Thumb Black Heart campaign.